Thank you for visiting Past the Wire TV, the YouTube channel of PastTheWire.com.
A lot of players do, and I think it's a mistake.
Well, I think you just said it because, you can't apply one rule to everything, and you will use them sometimes, but you are trying not to. I think that's the best strategy. 6 horse, the Brad Cox horse we haven't mentioned, who I actually really like. Mo Strike is his name.
Watch Saratoga today on Past the Wire TV with Dawn Lupul and Jonathan Stetton. Every Saturday morning of the meet, horses to play and to play against, vulnerable favorites, track trends, winning angles, the scope, and more. Watch, subscribe, ride with us. Nobody does it better.
To the best and hope for the best.
Broke well on the outside, and
but you don't expect to get speed like this.
Vacoma continues to battle on down at the rail. It is Vacoma who's going to win the Met Mile.
Buongiorno, everybody. Welcome to another Breeders' Cup Win and You're In episode on Past the Wire TV. Michael Wilson and myself are going to talk about this week's Breeders' Cup Win and You're In race. What was an exciting edition of the Haskell? No?
I thought it was a great Haskell. I mean, it's a race that's interesting where sometimes I think in a couple of years, we might have caught a flat Haskell where we don't have a ton to get excited about. Last year was a good version, but I think this year was a very good version with all these 3-year-olds kind of coming back into their own at the right time of this season.
You know, it was interesting observation about it. I think the last 7 Eclipse Awards for the leading trainer went to 3 guys that had horses in the race, Baffert, Brown, and Cox. So it's the last 7. And each one had a horse in the race. So and they were coming down the stretch together. So I thought it was a really exciting race going in. I thought that Jack Christopher and Taiba were both potential stars going into the race. And I think it played out really interesting with some interesting implications towards the Breeders' Cup Classic. It was a win and you're in, so Cyberknife is in. He got the trip, got up on the rail. He's in the Classic. I think another ramification would be Jack Christopher most likely doesn't point towards the Classic at this point, more likely towards the sprint or the mile. And Taiba, who is still probably the youngest and greenest and most upside of those 3, to me, I would watch that race, and my takeaway would be Cyberknife doesn't beat Taiba again or next time. I just thought he had a lot more upside and a lot more up against him in that race, and still ran extremely credibly well to run second. So going forward, I think Taiba is the horse to watch coming out of that race, and is probably, although he's not quote in the Classic yet, is probably the most dangerous threat to win the Classic of the field in the Haskell. Thoughts?
I agree pretty much with everything you said. I think we covered it on our Derby show when I said, Taiba is going to be a horse that's going to peak in the summer, and he's going to be a horse that's going to just get better. Him and Charge It were those 2 horses that I talked about.
Right.
It was not in the race. Charge It will come back into the fold. He ran phenomenal last time out. I think the race, I still think Taiba is going to be, him and Charge It are going to be your 2 kind of studs once we really get into the Breeders' Cup Classic picture. The older horse division, I think, is good, but I think these 3-year-olds are going to be very dominant when it comes to the Classic. I agree with you with Jack Christopher, I think a smart move for them would probably be point King's Bishop and maybe cut him back to the 7/8, if there's enough time to do that. But I don't fully see Flightline getting the distance of the Classic. And I think that could be a very interesting matchup, seeing Jack Christopher and Flightline probably in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile, if that's the way that they go. So it was a race that I think brings a bunch of interesting implications as we go forward, as these other dirt races shake loose.
We're so much on the same page, because as hard as they talk Flightline for the Classic, and as bad as they want to point for that, and there's a lot of people got him crowned the Classic winner already. I'm not on that train. I'm really not. I question, first off, whether he's going to be running in any Breeders' Cup race at all. And my next question is he really a 1.25 mile horse? I mean, you as a trainer and a horseman know a lot better than I. I'm coming at it as a handicapper and, student of the game. But, you can dominantly win at a mile and dominantly win at 1 1/8, even, open lengths under wraps. That doesn't mean that you're a 1.25 mile horse. I've seen a lot of horses win like that and then try and go that 1.25 miles, and they're just not the same animal. It's a whole different dynamic and a whole different type of race. Some tracks I do believe will carry a 1 1/8 horse, a 1.25 miles. I think Gulfstream Park is one of those tracks. I think Keeneland is one of those tracks. I don't think Del Mar necessarily is. I don't think Santa Anita, is. I don't think Belmont or Saratoga would be, but Keeneland is, and that's where the Breeders' Cup is this year, at least in my opinion. So that might help Flightline if he gets there. But I tend to agree with you. I think, he might wind up being a miler or a sprinter, and that's not a popular opinion, because, like I said, people have him, crowned the greatest thing since whoever. But that remains to be seen. But coming out of the Haskell, now let's give the winner his due. I thought, and I think you agreed, that the race before the Haskell, he was, I think, 1-2 or 2-5. And had to work a lot harder than I expected him to get up for the win. And if you watch the replay, he was lucky to get the ball. That he easily could have lost that race. I mean, I remember watching it live, and I'm like, I'm not sure if he got it, and he just got a perfect bob to get up and win that race. I thought that the Haskell would set up potentially for him to have a shot if Taiba and Jack Christopher hooked up, and it really didn't go that way, but it did set up well for him. He capitalized on it. He was very game coming up the rail, had a nice little burst, definitely ran much better than he did the time before at Churchill Downs. So I would say he took a step forward, and, I want to give him his due, but I was just so much more impressed with Taiba's race in defeat that going forward, I can't really get on his bandwagon for being a serious Classic threat without, a lot of defections and a lot of things happening between now and November.
Well, the interesting thing is, the Exacta was 2 Sons of Gunrunner, which we do know Gunrunner was able to get the 1.25 mile distance. I think Cyberknife might want to get the 1.25 mile, but I think at the 1.25 mile, Taiba takes a step forward. I think Cyberknife ran a great race. And my take on the race was, Taiba had Jack Christopher measured and headed him, and then all of a sudden Cyberknife popped up the rail, and if you look, Taiba tried to re-engage and catch him, but Cyberknife has a much more explosive turn of foot, and he's able to quicken very quickly. Taiba has to have a sustained run and can't close the distance as quick as Cyberknife does. So Cyberknife was impressive in the Arkansas Derby. We talked about it on the Derby show. I didn't love him for the Kentucky Derby. I thought his last win in the Matt Winn Stakes was, kind of disappointing. But then today's Monday. So on Saturday, it was very, very interesting in terms of how he handled himself in that race. In the paddock I saw when they were saddling him, he was rearing up when they were trying to saddle him. He looked like a handful. I thought the horse was washed out in the post parade, and I just thought he did not look like he was composed enough to put together a big performance. So the fact that he overcame all of that and still put up a big performance bodes well for him down the line as he hopefully matures over these next couple months and settles into himself. But if he gets that upset in the Haskell, it'll be very interesting to see how he handles himself in an atmosphere like Saratoga, where there's a lot more going on and there's a lot more people. I do think, we do know Baffert likes to ship for the Haskell, and granted, he can't run Taiba in the Traverse because of the Naira stuff that's going on with him, but I do think going the 1.25 miles, you'll see Taiba emerge forward. I think Cyberknife is going to improve as well, and he won the race. I mean, I can't take anything away from Cyberknife. I might like Taiba better. I've always liked Taiba better, but I do think Cyberknife, hats off to him for being in the Breeders' Cup Classic. And I might have made a little mistake. I had a hard gym workout this morning, so my mind's not working great. We do have a good group of older horses. And I think in that good group of older horses, probably the true 1.25 mile horse is Country Grammar. I do think Life is Good. Again, he's another one of those horses, kind of like, does he get the 1.25 miles? Is he really a 1 1/8 horse? Should they run him in the mile? Do you want to put a horse like that in the Classic against some of these 3-year-olds that can really run? So I think we're getting to a stage in the game where there are very few true top 1.25 mile horses. And John, you asked the question, there's a significant difference between a 1 1/8 and a 1.25 miles. And I've mentioned it before, even in the morning when you're breezing these horses, there's a big distinguishing factor between breezing a horse a 1/2 mile and they're fast for a 1/2 mile, and a horse that can go fast for 5/8 and a horse that can go fast for 6 furlongs. Those distances change a lot. Going from a mile to a 1.16 even 1.16 to a 1.8 is a big difference. It's a different realm, and that jump from 1.8 to a 1.25 changes the whole ball game with a lot of these horses.
I agree. When I watched the race, and out of the break, Taiba actually broke in front and was on the lead, and Mike grabbed a hold of him and took him back, almost like they didn't want to be on the lead. And when he did that, it really worked against him because he wound up inside. Horses came over. He was checking, steadying, getting a lot of kickback, not really getting what I would consider to be a good trip. And there were like 2 points in the race where I thought he was done, and I thought he was finished. He was dropping back on the inside. He seemed to almost be not quite climbing, but just not getting over the track well, and I was like, wow, Taiba's just not going to be there. But when they turned for home and he swung him out into the clear, like you said, light bulb went off and he just became a different type of horse and really didn't have that explosive kick, you know what I mean, or that like turf-like turn of foot, but he was chomping into that ground pretty good, and he almost won the race despite the trip. And you have to admit, he's still a very lightly raced, inexperienced horse.
That was race number 4, right? I mean, it's only a 4th career start.
Right. He won his maiden wire to wire sprinting. He won the Santa Anita Derby, sitting off the pace. The Kentucky Derby was a complete debacle. I don't know what he did or didn't get out of a race like that, or whether it was good or not to run him in it. I guess it's educational. I don't know what you would say as a trainer, but he seems to not, lost any no worse for the wear. So now with the Haskell, I would say he's ready now. Now he's got enough experience, and his 4th start. We'll see really how good he is or isn't next time he runs, and I have a feeling that he is pretty good.
Well, I think even for the connections, it's interesting. I remember going into the Derby, they talked to Zidane and said, hey, he said, I have a Derby horse, and they kept asking him at Santa Anita, who's this Derby horse? And he was a slow workhorse when he got going and before he broke his maiden, and then he burst onto the scene. But I remember Michelle, you mentioning that she had spoken to him and said, who is this Derby horse? Because we haven't seen a horse in your colors jump out. And that was Taiba. So I think even just for himself, with how he's progressing every single race and learning, it's also a learning curve for the connections. And Baffert is as sharp as they come when it comes to training dirt horses. I've been blessed to work around him and see the operation, and there's nobody that can peak a horse on a day in a dirt race like Baffert. but there's still a learning curve as you get these horses forward and you try and perfect their running style, understand what they need, even for the jockeys and riders, understanding when to move the horse and what's the right timing and what do you need to do exactly with that horse to get them to fire on the day. And maybe they learn, hey, look, we just need him to break, we need him to track, and we need him to sit third, and we need to be able to keep him in the clear to make a sustained run. And I agree with you. At the 3/8 ball, I said, this horse is in trouble because they're already scrubbing on his neck. And the other, Jack Christopher, is traveling in the bridle, and a lot of these other horses look pretty good. And I said, God, that horse early. But as they kept riding him and hand riding him, he just found himself and just kept running on over those horses. So it's, horse racing, as people don't always like to remember, is we lose a lot more than we win in this sport. So every race, you're just trying to perfect the process of how to get the horse to peak on the day. And with a horse in their third start running the Kentucky Derby, yes, I'm sure they wanted to run in the Derby and hopefully be able to make up for Medina's Spirit and what happened there. But I have a feeling that the goal has always been the Breeders' Cup Classic with this horse, because going in third race of the Derby, you're not necessarily saying I'm an overwhelming shot to win, because there's just so much stuff that can happen in that race, versus if you point towards the Classic and you win the Classic, which I do think this horse is entirely possible of doing, it helps to build over that series, and all you need to do is win on the big day.
I tend to agree. He's still got to get there. He's going to have to take a path outside of New York. I don't think there's any loss in not being able to run at Churchill Downs, but he's got the Pennsylvania Derby to look at, which is not a win and you're in race, but the Awesome Again, which is a win and you're in race. Could a horse like Taiba wheel back in a race like the Pacific Classic, or is that too much too soon against older horses?
What I think we see with Bob at this time of year when he's trying to point these horses for the Breeders' Cup Classic is he does space them out. But what he could do, depending, and I guess a lot of it depends on where he's going with Country Grammar. So the fact that he can't run in New York, he's pretty much has to run these horses in a lot of these California preps, and they are going to have to face each other, because we're down with the Haskell and the winning your ins are just in specific spots. So the question is Baffer going to say, okay, we'll get Country Grammar and we're going to go into the Pacific Classic and try and win that? And then do we sit on Country Grammar and then go with Taiba and try and win the Awesome Again? And we've seen Baffer wheel back horses and then train them for 8 weeks into the Breeders' Cup Classic and peak them on the day. So we know he's perfectly capable of doing that. The question is, how quickly does this horse recover? To me, he doesn't look like a horse that bounce out of a race like this extremely quickly and be prepped to run back quickly at top form. He seems like a horse that you need to run him, let him recover, train him hard, get him back to where you had him, and kind of do peaks and bring him down and peak him again and bring him down, versus a horse like Cyberknife, who won the race. He seems like a horse, a high energy horse who's going to bounce out of a race, and you can just kind of take it easy on him for a month, not have to train him hard and wheel him back in a race in 3 weeks or a month and still have the horse performing extremely well. So I would guess, and I might be wrong, that Bob might say, let's point this horse for the Awesome Again. Let's train him into the Awesome Again and try and win that race at Santa Anita, split up, Country Grammar and him, and then train from the Awesome Again, because you'll have a month into the Breeders' Cup Classic, and that should give him plenty of time.
Interesting. That's really interesting, and probably a good plan. And you kind of answered my question. I was going to close out with an observation and a question. And the question was going to be, which you kind of answered, but I'll let you elaborate on it for a minute, and then I'll tie into an observation which goes back to another show. But okay, Cyberknife won the Haskell, winning you're in, he's in. Okay, Taiba still has to, quote, get in, which we know he's going to do, even if he doesn't win and you're in race, he's probably going to be there if they want to run him. But it is advantageous. It's a big bonus or benefit to win and you're in. Does that put Cyberknife at a bit of an advantage over Taiba, or with connections like this, it really doesn't matter? You know, the money's there to run if you want to run. But the Cyberknife now say, you know what, the pressure's off. I could go in easy spots. I can kind of do what I want getting there. Is that an advantage in any kind of way, shape, or form from a training standpoint?
I think it's a advantage, right? So the win and you're in basically means you don't have to pay the entry fee, which is substantial on these horses, depending on, you know, when you nominated them, but it scales, but it is still a big entry fee to run the Breeders' Cup if you don't have a win and you're in. I foresee them either, and Brad Cox is phenomenal at campaigning his horses, and that's what I think he's one of the best at in the country, hands down, is understanding, hey, you know what, I've got the classic, I've got the win and you're in under my belt. I can skip certain races and go for easier spots and keep my horse fresh and on a win streak. So when I go into the classic, we're going in full of confidence and we're going in with a horse that's still on the top of his game. Because if I look at a horse like this, could you run in the Haskell? Sure. We do know that Zandon's going to be in the, I mean, not the Haskell, the Travers. You might catch Charge It in the Travers. You might catch, so you might catch some significant competition. And I think the last thing you want to do with a horse off of a 2-race win streak is go run him against some horses that might beat him, and then have to try and get that horse's confidence and fitness back to where it needs to be to run on the day. I would a horse like this and run him in the Whitney or one of those older horse races. I'd try as a trainer, and again, it's your goal, and we talk about it as a sport, right? We all want these horses to run against each other every single time and see that competition and each other pushing each other in races. But your goal is to win the Breeders' Cup Classic. So what you need to do for your horse to get there is potentially dodge some of those tougher races in the meantime, and then make sure when you walk into Keeneland on the day, which is, yes, it's not Churchill Downs, but it still is Brad Cox's backyard, say, you know what, we're just going to walk in here with a solid horse ready to go for the Classic in our home track in Kentucky.
And that just screams to me what you just said, Pennsylvania Derby.
Yeah.
$1 million race, probably duck some of the killers, relatively easier spot than, you know, some of the other big races in New York, the Travers and, you know, back at Belmont and whatnot. So based on that, Pennsylvania Derby. Now let's close out with this. Back to Taiba. He's a bit of an anomaly on some things we've discussed recently. Here's a horse who's a budding star. He's a 3-year-old. It's only July, and we're talking about him as a Breeders' Cup Classic contender. That says serious racehorse. I think you and I have good, respectable opinion. So if we're talking about him as a Breeders' Cup Classic horse, Bob's thinking of him that way, possibly. But he's outside the mold. He's a 1.7 million purchase. And we've talked recently about how so many of those don't turn out the way that you think that they will, and how the mid-range is 200 to 300,000. We talked about it. Now other people are talking about it and doing studies on it, which I find very interesting. But he's 1.7 million. So he's kind of outside that thing. So talk a little bit about that, because although so many of them don't turn out, we know that. Doesn't mean that one can't, and that, you know, the eyes can't be on a special kind of horse that brings that kind of money. And hats off to what was it, Gary Young, I think, picked him out. Was that
Gary Young? Gary Young. Yeah,
he did.
He picked him out. So,
you know, hats off to him for spotting a horse that might be worth 1.7 million, and there's not a lot of horses I would say that about.
So we could go back, because we have talked about some of these sweet spots, and I have talked about some of these sweet spots in 2-year-old sales. And I think Gary Young selected a phenomenal horse, and Bappert's had another one that was a little bit outside the lines. Gamine was a very expensive filly as well. I want to quote, and I don't want to misquote, Pollock's article, and I think it mainly looked at yearling purchase prices. Okay, so Taiba was actually a $140,000 yearling. So somebody made a killing turning them around, selling them for 1.7 million. So He's a horse that has obviously showed his talent as he matured as a 2-year-old in a breeze show, and then has continued to go on. I don't know where we're going with this, but you know, every now and again you get a LeBron James. Every now and again you get the obvious athlete that continues to go on and continues to do well, and he's obviously shown that. So they bought Medina Spear for 30,000. So if we want to split the difference and say what's the median average on what they spend on 2-year, you know what we're at, you know, 600,000-700,000, something like that. But he is a very impressive horse that obviously showed it as a 2-year-old. And the one thing, and I don't think, you know, everybody wants to talk about Bob being a juicer or cheating or whatever. Bob makes very smart decisions with his horses, and smarter decisions than most. So we did not see Taiba until what point in the year this year?
Right.
Right? What did he do? He debuted in March,
Right.
then ran in April, and then ran the Derby in May. So you had a $1.7 million 2-year-old in your barn that looked good enough to go at 1.7 out of a 2-year-old sale, and you gave him all that time to get himself ready to be the horse that he is today. And so I think a lot of times when you buy these expensive horses, people rush them. And I always applauded Bob for this. I remember when we had the group that had Looking at Lucky in it, there was a group of horses that came in out of the 2-year-old sales, and Bob turned them all out on the farm for 30 days and then brought them back in. But none of them, I don't even remember a single one that came out of the 2-year-old sale that went straight in the barn and continued on training. Most of them were given 30 days to come down a little bit, and then we'd rebuild them and get them ready to run. So many people nowadays take horses from the 2-year-old sales, shove them straight into training and kick on and try and get them ready early. And then you don't have the horse at the end of the season, or you don't have the horse for the Kentucky Derby. So yes, is he the anomaly at 1.7 million outside the lines? Obviously they saw a talented athlete and said, let's give the athlete the time to develop on his own time scale, and it's paying off for him.
Right. And like you said, you don't know where you're going, and I don't know where we were going either. I just like to point out that he was a bit of an anomaly at that price based on what we were talking about and the Pollock article that followed what we had discussed. But now you bring up another question that I want to ask, because I love to extract knowledge from you as a trainer and a horseman, because I just love that. And when you talk, it just makes my mind work. $140,000 yield, right? Goes for 1.7.
Right.
What makes that happen? Fast workouts, right? Horse obviously is catching the eye. Big turn of foot. Broke his maiden in 109 and change, wire to wire sprinting at Santa Anita. Okay. And now we're watching him months later, and we're talking about him in the Breeders' Cup Classic vein. And we're saying that, he's really not that burst acceleration speed type of horse. He's kind of got to, get into a rhythm and come and is a 1.25 mile horse. That sounds almost like a different horse we're describing than the horse that went from 140,000 to 1.7 million because he can run light, a hole in a wind. Can you kind of explain that transition?
So when we look at horses in breeze shows, I'll look at how a horse does their work. So many people come to me and say, hey, this horse worked 10 and 10 flat, or 9 and 4, or 10 and 1. And I'll say, it's a slow horse. I say, what do you mean it's a slow horse? It worked 9 and 4. I'll say, it did everything it had to do to go 9 and 4. It was running twice as fast as everything else in terms of, leg turnover. Well, they're running like this versus 1, 2, 3. So when you look at some of these horses, where you start them off in a breeze show, you can back them up as far as you want and let them shift through their gears and go into the breeze and accelerate down the stretch and continue on out with a good gallop out. You have some horses that all you're going to get is that fast 1/8 of a mile, fast 1/4 mile, and you just drop and they kick, and then they hit the wire and they completely fall apart, and they have no speed other than a 1/4 mile's worth of speed. So there are horses in workouts when we're watching these 2-year-old breeze shows, and a lot of them. And Baffert, hats off, buys a lot of these. And I know Gary Young picked out this horse, but he probably did not show this horse to Bob before they purchased him, right? So you'll see in these 2-year-old sales, and Baffert's usually all over these horses in these 2-year-old sales, of these big rangy horses that were 10-1 or 10-2 or 10 flat, but did it so efficiently and so easily, and then continued out in 21 and change, 33 or 34 and change, and continue on out. Those are your 2-turn dirt horses. Now, when we're talking 6 furlongs at Santa Anita, I'm saying Taiba doesn't have a drop kick. Taiba is a fast horse. He can break from a gate, and he can hit a top speed, and he can maintain that top speed, and then he can accelerate slightly at that top speed. But he's more of a horse that wants to maintain a high cruising speed and then try and run down horses versus a horse that's going to travel in the bridle. You swing them out and they explode underneath you. So you can win with those horses sprinting because they are fast, and they're faster than everything else, as he's proven at the grade 1 level. He is faster than most horses. Some of those horses are just so overwhelmingly fast, even at the 6 furlong distance, they can beat you. Then once you stretch them out, because they have the natural ability to have stamina while maintaining that top speed, they can kill you off going a mile, mile and an eighth, mile and a quarter, and continue on out.
Interesting. All right. Interesting conversation. I learned a little. I like it. Taiba, the horse to watch coming out of the Haskell. Cyberknife gets his due respect. But we like Taiba a little better, especially heading towards the Classic. And Jack Christopher, we agree.
Go to the Breeders' Cup Mile. Go win a race. Don't run third. Go win the mile.
Right, probably a horse that can cut back, and it makes sense for Chad to cut him back because he's got Zandon, early voting. You know, those are potential classic type horses going forward. So he's got some maneuverability there with Jack Christopher, who has already proven to be an extremely fast, dominating 1-turn horse. So we'll see what happens with him going forward. All right, that's a wrap. We'll be back after the next domestic win in your in races. We're sticking to the domestic ones. The international ones we're going to leave for somebody else, but we've got all the domestic ones covered going forward, and we'll be ready for the Breeders' Cup in November. So on that note, ciao for now.
See ya.
Here with some exciting news. DRF Formulator, the gold standard in past performance information, is now free exclusively on DRF Bets. Join DRF Bets with the promo code WINNING. Get a $250 first deposit match bonus, a $10 free bet, and free Formulator already uploaded to your account. Access Formulator's premium features, including sortable trainer stats, race replays, personalized trip notes, and lots more. Free Formulator exclusively on DRF Bets.
Nobody does it better.